Hey guys, how's it going? It's Matthew with Blue Room Design. Thank you for joining me today. In this video, we are going to be going over Bootstrap, the front-end framework. We are going to be looking at this framework because in this project that we are engaged in, we are looking for what's worked for this framework and also maybe what hasn't worked for it or what we would prefer not to use from it. So, like I said before, we're not going to be directly copying Bootstrap, but we are going to be taking bits and pieces of information from it in order to create something that has utility for our personal projects and that will help us streamline our own development. Alright, so we're here on the front page of Bootstrap. It just gives us a little bit of information about the framework itself. They are lucky enough to have just a huge range of resources for getting a project up and running. They have an installation process through npm and other package managers. They also have CDNs available that are really easy to just plop into their get started template and get up and running with it. One thing that we will also notice here with Bootstrap is that they rely on a couple of third-party dependencies. And these dependencies are namely Jquery and Popper.js. Jquery is a JavaScript framework that just has a lot of useful tools. It's been used for years by many companies. Some say right now in the industry that their vanilla JavaScript itself is able to do a lot of the things jQuery is, so there's not as much of a need for it, but still it had its time period where it was really good and it helped a lot. Popper.js is a library that I'll let you guys go ahead and look up. I am not 100% versed in what it actually does, but I know that Bootstrap uses it for some of its elements in putting things like tooltips and popovers available. So just know that when you create a project with Bootstrap, if you want to leverage the whole functionality of Bootstrap, you're going to need all of these dependencies in. Other than just HTML and CSS, Bootstrap does also come with its own package of JavaScript code that helps with functionality. So that is the last dependency in here. Now, personal opinion on this for the framework I will be creating. If you'd like to include JavaScript, you can, but I will not be. I'm going to be doing 100% CSS. There's a lot of interactive things that you can do with it, and it just makes me feel good knowing that, I'm just going to be making something so lightweight that it just requires CSS. So that is one note that we will make here. Alright, let's continue and just run down to the layout tab here in the documentation. Let's get into some of the actual meat of this framework. So right off the bat, we kind of have the end-all be-all generic container of Bootstrap that's used to help lay out lots of the components that come available in it, and it also works as a container for the grid system. So it's definitely worth a look at, and as of right now, in the framework that I will be creating, I'm not 100% sure if there will be an end-all be-all container like this. I know that we're definitely going to want a grid of some sort to be able to manage, but if that might come in a couple different flavors and containers, so we shall see. Along with this, Bootstrap has a great list of just really key breakpoints for their media queries that are definitely worth taking a look at. They have mobile set up as, well, they're small device sizes for 576 pixels, tablets, desktops, etc. And the interesting thing to note here is that it is all in pixels, and that's actually something that I'm okay with. For things like usability concerns like the size of text, for that I really understand using a responsive type like ems or rems, but generally I'm really a huge advocate for pixels. If that's something that you don't like, you can go ahead and try to sell me on it otherwise for more responsive units. Please go ahead and just give me your opinion in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you. But without further ado, let's continue here. I'm actually going to run over to their grid directly. And as far as their grid system, Yep, right there. They use Flexbox to do it. I think that this is, great. Shows that we're leaving behind some of the older techniques and we're moving forward. Flexbox has great support right now across browsers, so it makes it just a really good candidate. A couple of the other frameworks that we'll be looking at here in the future are also using Flexbox for their grid layouts. Since we are doing this for our own projects, we have a little more flexibility in this. And CSS Grid, which is a new feature of CSS, literally built for grids, is just so powerful and so useful to use that we, for our own framework, at least me personally, we are going to create a grid framework using grid inside of our CSS framework. So if that didn't make any sense to you at all, let me sum it up in that we will be using the CSS Grid spec to create our own grid system in our framework. So using Flexbox, that's great. That's something that's going to have a little bit more cross browsers compatibility, which is definitely good, and I think that's a good move on Bootstrap's part. So here we can just go through and look at, they have columns that they add to rows. It's a pretty common syntax. We just add in multiple columns. We can set sizes, breakpoints, all of which I think that we need to implement in our grid framework using those media queries and sizes. All right, as we're coming along here, we have some utilities for layout. I find that these are very useful in, for example, changing display properties with a simple class, adding a class. So if I wanted to hide something, show it, make it a flex item, etc., I could use just classes to quickly do that. Also, margins and paddings is definitely something that I want to be able to add in, is just a dynamic way to add classes to our elements that we're creating and just really easily add in what direction of margin, how much of a margin do we want. That is specified more here in this paragraph here in the documentation. They just use the first letter of the word that they want to target. So here, for example, we have the margin right at the medium breakpoint, and then they're setting the value to 3, which will be specified. The actual unit for this value will be specified in the variable configuration part of our framework. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty here, and I would like to mention that Bootstrap uses a reboot, which they mention here is built upon reset CSS. Basically, it's taking all of our HTML elements and it's standardizing them across browsers, and it's just adding in a couple extra bells and whistles to our HTML elements so that we really get a clean slate as we start developing this framework. What I mean by that is we're changing box sizing to border box, as well as taking away things like margins that can sometimes skew our layouts. All right, on to components. Bootstrap, man, do they have some cool component names that I've never really heard of. Namely, down here, toasts. It's pretty interesting, and from what I understand, it is just a pop-up alert message that can be closed with a dialog, as well as potentially a user or some other actor. So, just kind of interesting adding that in. Then they have Jumbotron, which is kind of this is their banner, what's another word for it? Just that banner dialog area at the top of a page, you could use it for that, or just a call out box saying, hey, this is important, which is pretty interesting. Badges, buttons, progresses, spinners, media objects. All of these are pretty useful. I can definitely see a use for most of them. So just things that I would like to continue to take and put into our own framework include alerts, buttons, cards, Forms, we definitely want to specify kind of how our forms work, as well as images, modals, and we'll see where that takes us. But it's great to go in and look at Bootstrap to see what they have to offer. I think that we've been able to identify some things that we want to take away from the Bootstrap framework, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Please continue to look at Bootstrap through their documentation. Consider starting a project with it, just with their starter template. It's really easy to start experimenting with Bootstrap from there. So once again, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing the video. Go ahead and comment about your opinions of Bootstrap if you've used it before. What is your general opinion of it? I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching the video, and we will talk to you later.